It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Welcome into the Take Command podcast. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen. He's Logan. I'm Craig. If you're new to the show, welcome. Make sure you subscribe while you're here, wherever you're listening or watching right now. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like too. We promise you will like the 44-ish minutes still to go onto this here podcast. We will get into practice in just a moment as OTAs are underway in Ashburn. We're recording this on Wednesday afternoon after the second OTA. Logan, you were there, but the big topic is about who was not there. Chase Young predominantly, but Montez Sweat and Charles Leno also not attending. We talked about this a little bit on the first pod of the week, but what do you make of this now that we know, Leno not there? He did play in this system before in Chicago under Matt Nagy, but then you also have Sweat and Young not attending as they enter the final years of their contract. What do you make of it?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I think to me, it doesn't, I think we talked about this earlier in the week. It doesn't really bother me that a guy like Sweat isn't here. I know it probably should bother me more. Like old Logan, it probably would have bothered a lot. But I just feel like who he is. Like he knows the defense. He's been healthy. He's been consistent. And I think he's probably trying to – I have no inside information on this, but he's probably trying to leverage some type of contract negotiation. That would make sense. Same thing with Leno, I think probably to a certain extent, maybe an extension or a restructure. I do think the interesting one is Chase. And I think it's interesting because of kind of the offseason indications that he's gotten from the team, in terms of not renewing his fifth-year option, which, again, if I'm his agent, I don't really even care that much because I get to make more money if they have to franchise me, and I get to hit the open market sooner anyway, so not a huge deal. But also I think just from my own kind of what kind of messaging am I trying to send? If it was me, I'd come. And I think we talked about, Payne did an excellent job of coming to OTAs, being part of the meetings, being part of the individual, and then, didn't even do any team. And we'll talk about this more later, but right now they're not doing a whole bunch of team. The offensive defensive line are pretty much, they have one team period. Everything else is some version of team skeleton, which is, kind of the interior route runners versus linebackers and safeties, outside skelly, and then 7-on-7. And then there's one team period that's 20 plays. So there's a lot of route volume, a lot of pass game volume in right now. But in terms of what the D-line and the O-line are doing, it's a lot of individuals. So I think, the time in the classroom, like we talked about, is the thing that's really valuable. And the fact that he's not here for that, I think it's a decision that I probably wouldn't make. But again, I was a very different type of, my experience was much different than Chase's. And I think he can inform that however he wants.
So I hold strong on what I said yesterday on the radio, which is this isn't about optics. This isn't about messaging. This isn't about any of the stuff that I think a lot of people make it out to be. Because at the end of the day, if Chase went on Instagram Live and was bleep Ron Rivera, bleep this, bleep that, if he went off, right, and was they don't want to pay me, whatever, and he showed up in training camp and he showed up during the season and he got 16 sacks, they'd re-sign it. It's not about the optics. It's not about the storylines. It's not about any of that.
What do you mean? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So a lot of people are talking about, building trust and all those kinds of things, these intangible facets to the story. To me, what this is about and why this is a bad decision for Chase is this is a chance for him to become a better football player, and he's passing it up. And I understand there is work he can do on his own to still become a better football player. So it's not all or nothing, but are you maximizing your chances to be an effective player this season in a season where your earning potential is going to be decided, or not your earning potential. It's not even potential anymore, where your earnings will be decided for the future. And so to me, it's about it's not I'm mad at him because he hasn't proven anything. And I just can't believe this middle finger he's giving to the team, because it's not that. It's voluntary. He's allowed to not do this if he wants to go. And maybe he knew the practice plan and was look, I'm still working on some stuff and I feel really comfortable with the routine I'm in. Next week, when you guys do more team drills, I'll be there. We don't know that yet, right?
Sure.
But he is missing an opportunity to become a better football player, to get reps in, however, let's say he gets 10 to 12 of those 20 team reps, to do individual drills with his coaches, to be around and in the classroom. And I do think to the extent that there is kind of the messaging to the team, it's just like, do you want to be a part of the team? And Cam Curl today said after practice, Cam Curl, who was barely participating in the actual drills, said, I'm just coming to work. I like being with my guys. I like being a part of the team. I like being here. And I think that's one thing that you hear consistently when athletes retire is like they miss the locker room. They miss the camaraderie. They miss being around their teammates. And my question is, why doesn't Chase Young value that stuff the same as most other football players? And not to say that he has to do that to be a great player. He could still take this path and have a 16 sack year because he's ultra talented. And if he puts it together and he could still be very, very good or even great. But it does leave questions of like, okay, if this is important to 95% of guys, why is it not important to you?
Well, so, I mean, I think you kind of contradicted yourself there a little bit because it is about the messaging. It's about the message to the staff, to the team, about how much you like football and how much you want to be here. And I think so to me, like when I look at that, when you talk, I don't disagree with anything you said, just the way you characterized it. Like ultimately that's what we're talking about is like, does he want to be a part of this organization? Like it's just, I coach high school football. I you train, like you're around athletes, you kind of understand how they tick. I played for a long time. And I kind of felt like this whole thing was like, hey man, like we are not happy. And again, I don't have any inside information on this. This is just me like basing it on my experience when this has happened before. Sure. And I've observed this, like, the team is not happy with what you've been doing, like basically. And one of the things we're not happy with is that you haven't been around for off season. And you're right. We cannot impact you or force you to come. It's not mandatory, but like, we'd like you to be here. It's kind of the vibe I got right from this whole thing.
Right.
And the fact that you're just kind of turning your nose at it. Again, I don't think he's not sticking the middle finger to Ron. None of that's going on. I don't think that's a terrible thing, but like they asked you basically to come. They kind of said, we'd like him here and he's not here. And I think that's from a messaging standpoint, from a want to standpoint, that's the thing I think that gets me a little bit as a former player. If a guy did that in the locker room, I'd be like, man, that's an interesting move. I mean, I'm not going to fault him for making his own choices, like, cause that's his prerogative. But in the back of my mind, if he was on my team, I'd be like, man, that's surprising. So
I guess what I mean by the messaging versus to kind of clarify, because I see what you said about me contradicting myself. Yeah. The messaging stuff can be overcome. And that's why I think that's secondary to what can't be overcome is not being good enough on the field. And I think Chase is passing up an opportunity to become the best football player he can be. And so it's not about like why you do that. It's about the fact that when he gets out there and plays, he's not going to be as good at football as he would have been if he had showed up. Now, can I guarantee that's the case? No, I don't know what he's doing now. It's hard to quantify, obviously, how much one practice or 1 week of practice is work in May. But certainly, this is his best opportunity to get better. He is not taking it, and he cannot overcome a lack of production. That is the thing that ultimately will decide how much he earns. So while, yes, the message it sends and all that kind of stuff, it factors into this, and it makes it easier to follow and digestible in terms of a storyline, it doesn't matter if he produces. And I just think what he's doing is not giving him as good of a chance to produce. And for that reason, this is a mistake by him.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. And like I said, this is a very interesting OTA structure. I think this is the way a lot of teams are going. I like the structure. I think it's good. I like it.
By the way, something Bieniemy is certainly influenced because this is not how they've done it before.
Yeah, I would 100% say that. But the O-line and the D-line are just kind of doing an hour and 15 minutes of individual, and so maybe Chase feels like that would be better served doing other stuff. But I personally think, like, come do a Cam Curl. Come, don't practice, and just be in meetings. Like, no one's gonna care about that. No one's going to care. There's a ton of walkthrough in this phase. Like, there's a ton of time to be on the board, be around the guys. And then, I don't care, fly your guy out from Denver and then go do that practice afterwards. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's we talked about that last year. There's a lot of ways around this. And so, I don't know. You're right. Like, if he comes out and produces, no one's going to care. He's going to get paid. Everyone's going to be excited, right? He's arrived. He's the guy who we thought he was. Great. I'm going to be the first one to say that. But I do think these are weird decisions to be making right now. They just seem like there's like a lack of professionalism, I think. And he may have communicated with Ron. He may have communicated with the staff. And this is
and to Chase's credit, Ron did say there has been communication. They are
good.
in contact. So
yeah, right. And so, but it just seems like a weird decision. Like
Yes.
this is not going to be that hard. Optically, it's good. From a professional standpoint, to your point, it's good. You're going to be a better football player. I don't understand the motivation really. When it comes down to it, and again, I've never been that guy. I've never really understood that because I don't care who I'm working with in the off season. You're not going to be able to mimic the stuff you're getting here. Just the equipment that they have, even for individuals, the equipment they have, the 20 reps of team, whatever it is, like that's valuable time. And then getting in the context of building the relationship with my fellow position mates, understanding what the defense is looking for, all that stuff. And so I don't know. I think it's a little bit kind of confounding in my opinion, but I've seen guys miss and then play really well. So it doesn't, it's like not in, if he does play well, everything's going to be fine. And if he's confident he can do that, great.
Yeah. So the one question I do have in terms of his side of it, if you will, the one valid thing where I don't really have a great retort is he can't get hurt if he's not out there. And this is a year where he's obviously got to produce, and he can't produce if he's hurt. And we've seen guys get hurt in OTAs. Obviously, Armani Rogers goes down yesterday. I think a lot of Commanders fans think about Reuben Foster a couple of years ago when he goes down.
Yeah.
Just it happens. It's these things can also happen in individual workouts, but they tend to happen. With I don't know, and that's kind of my question. With some level of frequency at OTAs, what is the level though in terms of the risk of him getting hurt and that being a reason why he would sit out, knowing that this is the final year of his contract and he's got to be available when the fall comes around?
I mean, I personally don't think that holds any water, right? Because if you're training the way you're supposed to be training away from the facility, you're exposing yourself to injury risk. Like Kiko Alonso, we have the same agent. He tore his ACL doing linebacker drills, like getting ready for OTAs.
Right.
And thankfully the team picked up his contract and like took care of him, but they don't have to, right? And that happens. That happens all the time in the offseason. There was an offensive lineman, I forget his name. He was at Baltimore last year. He tore his Achilles, not in team activities, but training on his own. And like, it's part of the deal, like to train at the level required to be functional on an NFL field. There's a certain amount of risk associated with it. So if he's training the way he should be training away, like based on what I've seen the defensive line doing here, the risk is essentially the same. Like there's no difference in risk unless you're really, really being uber conservative with your own personal team, which is fine. But then I do think, like we've talked about, you're exposing yourself to a certain level of risk when you come back and have to play during mandatory minicamp or whatever it is. So I guys say that I don't want to get hurt. I understand that in a more like Baltimore, for example, they do a very, very competitive OTA period. I get it, right? You don't get a lot of time to warm up. It's a little bit dicey, whatever it is, right? But ultimately, like in this situation, in the context of what they're doing here, I think the risk is probably the same or at least comparable, if you know what I'm saying. So
yeah, no, 100%. And that tends to be where I land. It's like there's no good retort other than like there's no logic thing. There's no like rhetorical mechanism to answer the question other than it's the same risk he would have on a field in Denver or wherever else. Like he's
the only thing I could possibly consider is that you are with some guy who is dialed into the nines for you personally, understands how you lift, understands the field work you need, is watching film with you, is doing everything you possibly could. Like O-line masterminds does this a little bit, which is why I think maybe Leno feels comfortable with like lifting. Like they're watching film, they're breaking down offenses. They have, I think the guy Manyweather has offensive installs that he uses with the guys there from different teams. Like he's very dialed in. And so maybe Leno feels okay missing because of that. Yeah. But I don't, from what I understand and what I've seen of Chase, and it's only the stuff he puts on Instagram, so it's not super comprehensive. I don't think his team is structured that same way necessarily. So that's where I would be like, well, get around the team, get around ball. And to Cam Curl's point, which I think is an excellent point, like guys who like football have a hard time staying away from football.
Yeah, no, 100%. The other comparison that I've seen that I liked and wanted to get your opinion on is I actually had a YouTube commenter say like it's kind of like Terry missing last year, in that we saw the impact it had offensively. Obviously, their situations are very different. So when I first read that sentence, I was like, I'm sorry, what, Terry? No, that dude has actually like been awesome his entire career, as opposed to Chase, who has had one solid year and then otherwise been disappointing. But we saw Terry and Carson early last season not on the same page, and it was pretty easy to ascribe it back to them not having any reps together in the spring, especially considering Carson and Jahan were pretty locked in training camp. So when we talk about all three of these guys, Sweat, who I worry the least about because he has had a ton of reps over the course of his career with the guys he'll be playing with, in terms of Sweat or in terms of Allen and Payne, obviously. But Chase and then ultimately Leno on the offensive line with the whole new unit, Cosme, the only guy who's going to be on the field that was on the field last year, but obviously in a different position. How concerning is it that Sweat and Young and Leno are not here from a cohesiveness standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, defensive line's probably like the least important position in terms of cohesiveness because the rules tend to be the simplest. But I do think that this defensive line is at their best when they're all kind of rushing together. They're rushing off of each other. They understand kind of what each person's goals are, and this is something you get kind of anecdotally as you talk, like some guys prefer rushing with Montez because they've worked with Montez more over the course of, the last 2 years because Chase has been out and they don't quite understand and feel out what Chase is doing. So I do think that there's value there. There's always value. It's a team game. You got to work together. You got to understand the calls, understand the communication. So I think it's not as important as other positions, but I do think it's important for Leno. It is a little surprising because it is a new system, but also I do think that this system, just in the limited exposure I've had the last 2 days watching practice and then watching all of Kansas City stuff, I think is an offensive line that it's actually going to help him, an offensive system that's going to help him a lot. It's going to insulate him a lot. It's going to protect him, not going to put him out there the same way. And so I do think his production, just from a default standpoint, will be better. And like you said, he's been exposed to this offense before. Maybe he feels like he can pick it up really quick. He's a 10-year vet, whatever he is. Like, I don't think this is a huge thing. But, in terms of the hierarchy, like I think Leno, because it's an offensive player, they have to know a little bit more. It is significant. I think Montez has been around a ton. The guys know him really well. And I think Chase would probably be the second most important just because he hasn't been, and it's not his fault. Some of it, the injuries kept him away from kind of building a chemistry with the guys, which I do think leads to better rush units. So that would be my one thought on that.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. And that leads nicely, Logan, into what we saw at practice today. More specifically, what you saw at practice today, because I saw a couple of clips on Twitter. You were there. You've also had a chance to buzz through the film real quick. So when you talk about big picture stuff, let's not even get into like the schematic stuff that we've seen from Bieniemy, all that. Structure, tempo of practice. What is EB's influence in terms of how this OTA looks compared to years past?
Yeah, I think that's been the most interesting thing about it. It's like they're kind of traditional Indo, but there's not like Indo directly into like team run, team red zone, third down. It doesn't go like that. There's no team periods, or there's very few team periods, I should say. So it starts off with like team Skelly, which is like, tight end, 2 tight ends, a running back or a fullback versus 4 linebackers and safeties. And they kind of work match pass concepts. And then the receivers go kind of shell coverage down on the other end, or they go against the DBs in some type of shell coverage. So they are running, the skill position guys are running a ton. They are running a ton of reps, a ton of routes, and it's kind of under the guise of these different, different kind of drills, you know what I mean? Like
I saw today there's like some 4-on-4 type of stuff.
That's the Skelly.
2-on-2s, right? As opposed to, just one-on-ones or, maybe occasionally you get 2-on-2s. You're getting more complete route concepts.
Yeah, and so then they do a ton of 7-on-7. I think they yesterday or 2 days ago they did about 30 plays of 7-on-7, and they do 7-on-7 in the field. They do 7-on-7 in the red zone, and they started the 7-on-7 red zone stuff earlier, right? And I think that's probably something they brought in from Kansas City, and that's what you see more skilled offenses or more dynamic offenses doing earlier in the process. It used to be like, hey, day one install is first and second down. So we're going to do first and second down stuff, and then we'll do that for 3 days. And then we'll get to third down. And then our last thing is red zone because it's the most specific thing we do. I think teams have kind of realized that those situations, third down, red zone, are more important. So they start prioritizing those a little bit differently. And I think you see that with the OTA period right now. That's a big part of what they're doing. And so the receivers are running a ton of routes. The thing that sticks out to me as individual, we got to watch a lot of individual today, is we watched the receivers and the quarterbacks. It was Brissett and Fromm down at our end, and then Sam was down at the other end with the other quarterback from Fordham, the rookie guy.
Mm-hmm.
So, but EB was standing there. They were running 10-yard out routes, and he stood there in front of the receiver line and watched specifically where they put their foot in the ground for 10 players in the row. And if you didn't hit your depth, he would say, "Get your depth," and he was very demonstrative and loud about it. Later in the Skelly part of practice, Gibson went the wrong way coming out of the huddle. He didn't know exactly what to do. Gave him a nice stern talking to, brought the huddle back together, and then they rebroke it. And I just thought, like, the attention to detail that he's shown already is very, very high. You know, they're running a lot of screens. The screen game, the details on the screen game are much, much better already, right? The details with alignments, the details with chips. You can just tell that's something that's going to be infectious. And I think that's something that I get very excited about it. I don't want to say it feels like a real offense because what they were running last year was a real offense, but the details, the crispness, and the kind of the competitiveness over the last 2 days is something that I wasn't expecting, because usually when you install a new offense, the defense, especially one that's been here for 4 years, is light years ahead. But here you've got an offense that looks pretty sharp and looks pretty good. And I think that is kind of my 1,000-foot view of the first 2 days, you know.
That is music, I think, to everyone's ears. It's what we thought EB would be. It's what he was promised to be, and certainly seems to be delivering so far. In terms of schematics, there's not a lot of team stuff, but what can you tell just in terms of drills and stuff too? Like, are they working a lot on some of the RPO footwork and some of the ball handling and things like that? You know, route concepts that look familiar from what you've seen in Kansas City's film. Like, what are the things that are the same, different, you know, from last year, both what they ran here and what Bieniemy was running in Kansas City?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the thing that sticks out to me is, I mean, a million things, but one, the most definitive is probably the use of different personnel groupings and how he uses them, right? It's, you know, it's predominant, like, so they're running a lot of plays, you know, like, I don't want to make it think like they're running a ton of plays. I think they're running about 50 plays of like team related stuff, team pass related stuff. And it's all pass, and they run like 2 runs in the day, right? And it was interesting. Someone made a comment that was like, "Oh, you know, our screen game is actually our run game. So even though we only have 2 called runs in the whole practice, we're going to get more reps on the screen game." And everyone always wonders why Andy Reid is so good at the screen game. It's just because he prioritizes it. Yep. He prioritizes the heck out of it, and so you're seeing that already. And I think EB probably learned and took that. So what I'll say is the diversity of the personnel groupings and how he uses kind of Cole Turner, John Bates, you know, Logan Thomas, Curtis Hodges, to kind of like what he's asking them to do. Like today, Curtis Hodges caught a speed out at 10 yards from a bunch, a position that would normally be required for the wide receiver, but the receiver is kind of setting the pick for him to get open on this route. And I thought, wow, that's a really easy throw. It's a really easy catch, and you're allowing this guy to use his athleticism to make this play for you, right? And then you're getting a lot of the back out of the backfield very quickly, stressing the defense with overloads, meaning like going from a 2x2 to a 3x1 kind of on the snap and getting people out in the route. The protections, the play actions. It's a very diverse, challenging offense that presents multiple looks to the defense. And in terms of concepts, it's all concepts that you see from around the league. I think the thing that separates, especially this early in the process, is just how formationally, how from a personnel grouping standpoint, he's getting to these concepts. And I think that is something that is exciting. And there are little wrinkles to some of the concepts that you see from Kansas City. You know, for example, they ran a mesh concept today where it looked like, you know, they're running across the middle of the field, and the 2 receivers, the tight end and the slot receiver, usually just cross and then run to the flats afterwards. But one of the receivers, the receiver, after he crossed the tight end, instead of running straight across the formation like he's running to the opposite flat, stopped, ran vertical, and basically ran like a 10-yard sit and the defense was expecting the crossing routes, and they separated and spread out accordingly, and the hole right over the football was wide open. I thought, well, that's a nice little wrinkle to that play. A play that everyone sees, everyone runs that play, but it just is a little bit of window dressing that's going to make it a little bit easier for the quarterback. So, I mean, I watched yesterday's practice. I'm watching today's practice again after being out there on the field. And it's almost challenging offensively to kind of keep track of everything. Unlike last year, where it was a little bit more stagnant and it was a little bit easier to kind of monitor. This year, so far anyway, feels dramatically different.
Yeah, definitely. All right, quarterbacks. There wasn't a lot of team reps to be split up, but how did they split them, and how did both guys, Brissett and Howell, look?
So again, just to make this clear, they are kind of together, right? And they are doing like 1s, 2s, and 3s, and there are enough reps to get that done. It's just not with the offensive line. So instead of doing 50 plays of team, they're doing 20 plays of team, and the rest is 7-on-7. So you are getting a lot of look at the quarterbacks and what they're doing. And it's been Sam Howell with the ones, at least as far as I can tell, almost every single time. And quite frankly, he looks like he deserves it. He looks very sharp. The ball's coming out of his hands nice. He's been very accurate. It's been a couple times where the defense has played good coverage. He's had to hold on to the ball. At this time of year, I don't like seeing that personally, but that happens. That's part of this time of year. And he just looks very comfortable. In routes on air, accuracy's good, ball velocity's great. I don't want to overhype him because there's a lot of time left to go, but looks good. I'm just going to say looks good. Brissett looks good. He's working with the 2s predominantly, and that's a little bit more challenging because you got some younger guys in that group, guys who aren't overly experienced all the time. And so it gets a little bit messy. And you can tell he's kind of feeling his way through some new concepts. There's stuff that I think that I undervalued about this offense when I was watching Kansas City, but the quick game specifically is something that they've really been leaning on the last couple of days. So 3-step drops, slants, flats, sticks. What else do you run? Hitches, stuff like that. And I think there's times where it's there, but he's not used to kind of how quickly it's coming up, and he's just hanging on the ball a little bit long. So I think he'll get better as they go. Fromm's actually looked pretty good, with the 3s. He's made some nice throws. Arm looks live. He threw a pick today, but I think, pretty solid from all 3 guys. And the thing that I love about it is they're throwing a ball in Skelly. They're throwing a ball in that 2v2. They're throwing a ball in 7-on-7. And EB is coaching immediately. Hey, man, the ball's complete. You can say, hey, I want this. You can see his mouth. He's a loud talker. Oh, I want to throw to this spot. Don't hold it that long. And that to me, I think is going to accelerate that quarterback growth from everybody because they're all going to get that feedback on the field. They're going to get in the meeting room. They're going to get it pre-practice in the meeting. So, it's day 2. So everyone just chill out. Can we get that chill out? Everyone chill out. But I'm cautiously optimistic about the direction the offense is going.
So I would just underscore here to go back into our first segment. That's why being around matters, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're a guy like Chase Young and Jack Del Rio is giving a coaching point, or your D-line coach is giving a coaching point to someone else, even if you're not in the drill on that rep, there's value there. You understand what the coach wants. You can learn something. You can't do that going one-on-one against a bag. It just is not a thing. And so again, if he's sitting out this week to work on some individual stuff because he knows this is not a very heavy week for that kind of coaching, even those kinds of situations for O-line, D-line, because there's only 20 team reps in the period and everything else is fairly pass-heavy skeleton type of stuff.
Yeah.
Fine. Whatever. But if he continues to miss this and, they get to a point where they're working on the run game, they're working on, some more full team type of stuff, and he's still not there, that is the value that he's missing. So I thought that was because of the way you described that, I thought that was good to underscore. On how the footwork, that was kind of the big thing for him last year in camp, and then improving on that. It got better. Still some questions about some stuff in the Dallas game, but how does he look now in terms of comfort? And, also I know it's hard to tell because can let me even ask you this. Can you tell, without knowing the coaching points exactly at this point of the offseason?
It's hard to tell. I will say I forgot his number. And I was like, who's 14? Like, he looks pretty sharp on his drops, you know? And it's him, obviously.
Yeah.
So I do think he looks better.
Yeah.
Again, part of it is just I'm still getting a feel for like what they're doing offensively. They are doing more stuff. It's more stuff from the gun. That's makes sense because that's what he did in Kansas City. And Sam looks better from the gun because that's what he did in college. So I think that all makes sense. Yeah. So, you know, that'll be something to kind of keep an eye on. But to me, over the first couple of days, he looked good, you know, and like I'm happy. And again, there was a couple hiccups here and there from everybody, but I think it's like the arm talent is exceptional. And if he can kind of continue to grow and continue to learn and continue to develop, you know, it could be special. And again, second day of OTA, everyone calm down, including myself. So just take a deep breath. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd rather hyperventilate and get really mad on the internet about Sam Howell that he's going to the Hall of Fame tomorrow.
Right. But the other interesting thing before we move on from the segment is the defensive backs.
Mm-hmm.
They've been doing a lot of different stuff out there. Cam's obviously not practicing because of whatever was going on with him. Is he holding out for has he said anything?
I think it was actually, I don't know. I didn't see anything specific in terms of reasoning. Right. I'm sure he did. I didn't get it. I read some quotes. I didn't read the full press conference. But he did say, you know, the quote that kind of went around was that he did not want to, or he wanted to be there, right? Like he wanted to be around the guys. He likes being there.
Yeah. And, you know, if he's holding out for an extension, good for him, you know, whatever. Yeah. But he's here, and I think he's doing it the right way because I think, quite honestly, I think Duran showed you the best way to get this done, you know. Stick around, be around the team, and then have a good year, and you're going to get paid. So, but the defensive backs, he's not practicing, so Percy Butler's been in the post. Forrest has kind of been the you know, the strong safety. There's no really strong or free safety in this look, but if I had to kind of assign it, one's, you know, those are the two guys playing. Quan's worked in a little bit. Forbes has pumped in at the nickel. St. Juice has been at the nickel. The rotation in the back end's been really interesting. Jamin Davis is out, so Cleek Hudson's been playing linebacker, and then Cody Barton's the other linebacker. And it's the speed that those safeties have, you know, is pretty dynamic. And it's just like if they can figure it out, and especially when Cam gets back, like that group could be very, very special. Oh, you know, Emmanuel Forbes, talking about him. He has a pretty good couple of days. Sometimes I feel like he's a little out of control. Got bodied a little bit today by Curtis Samuel. Cole Turner.
Okay.
On a route today, kind of collision, couldn't quite sit down on it. You know, I think I'm just going to be hyper aware of any time there's contact with him, but looks sharp, looks fast, able to run with Curtis Samuel. Had a go today with Curtis Samuel, ran with him in a nice way. So, that group is going to be so fun to watch. And if they can develop, you know, 25%, that's probably high 15% over the next couple of weeks, couple of months, like that group's going to be scary because Quan does an excellent job, had a man-to-man coverage rep on Logan Thomas the first day and just looked like was in his pocket and made a nice play on the ball. Like they've got some ball players over there. So that's going to be a lot of fun to see how that group develops.
Before we move on to some other positional stuff on the offensive side to wrap up the show, how did they actually line up in the limited number of team reps? Like, was it Kendall and BSJ? Was it Forbes? Like, do you remember the
So it just depends. Like the first day, you know, it was predominantly Forbes as the nickel, and then today it was predominantly Benjamin St. Juice in the nickel. I think they're just going to kind of cross, like the same way you would an offensive line. You're going to cross-train, get people in good spots, and see what the best solution is at the end of the year, you know, when season comes around. But I really think like they all look like they're going to settle in fine either way. But, you know, it's the back end safety guys that I think I'm excited about the most because the speed that Butler has, like he covers so much ground from that post spot, and they haven't really had a guy quite like that in a while. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. The last guy they had with that kind of speed was probably Monte Nicholson. And Monte had this like 5-game stretch where it looked like he was going to go to the Hall of Fame. And then like reality set in. Obviously he had a lot of other stuff that happened as well. He was with the DC Defenders this year. That was crazy.
Was he really?
Yeah. He was there. And so was Swearinger. And I was like, I covered an NFL football team where this was the starting safety duo. But you know, that back end speed to be able to cover things sideline to sideline means so much to a defense. And so, yeah, Butler can be that guy. Like that's fantastic.
And obviously Cam's not even out there, which is crazy. So,
right. Exactly.
Like, they just got a lot of good football players.
What a concept. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. All right, let's wrap up with let's start with the tight end position. Obviously, the biggest bummer of the day. Ron Rivera announces that Armani Rogers had an Achilles injury. Ian Rappaport later reporting that it was indeed a full tear of the Achilles, so he is not going to be able to play this season. He is someone who I had extremely high hopes for. Such an incredible athlete. Thought he could develop into a starter. Thought he would win the job just because of his skill, and that he could potentially turn into not just a starter for this team on a room full of what's the word I want to use here? Well, I mean, Logan Thomas is kind of proven, but other than that, unproven tight ends, like he would just be the best of the bunch. I think with his skill set, he could have been a really, really excellent football player in this scheme, knowing what Bieniemy's done with tight ends in the past. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So what does that leave for the tight end room now? And obviously, you've already talked about how Bieniemy is using some of these guys, and so I don't know if that favors. It's more day 2 of OTAs, but if that favors any particular skill set and how that matches with the guys in the room.
Well, right now, I think they're going to have to bring in another body just for camp. The way these guys are running right now, it's a lot of reps, so they're going to need to get somebody in here just to kind of help legs, I think, a little bit. But I think these are the 4 guys that are going to be on the roster. Like, Curtis, they haven't blocked anybody yet. They haven't had pads on yet. But, and I think Curtis, if I'm being hypercritical of him, I think there's times where you say, man, is he playing as hard as he can? But when he runs, he as your 4th tight end, hell yeah. Like, that's perfect, Cole Turner is kind of picked up where he left off last, training camp, like where he just looked like the most dominant route running tight end on the roster. Just his ability to kind of be sudden and catch contested passes, and like he's going to be a weapon. And I think Armani and him were going to kind of be competing for that. I forget the guy's name, but in Kansas City, their 3rd tight end was a converted wide receiver who was 6'6", 230 pounds.
What was it? Fortson? Jody Fortson?
Well, yeah, Fortson. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so, they'd put him out on slants and have him run fades. And I think that role now is definitively Cole's. And I think Curtis can push for that, but it's probably more of a Y. So he's going to back up Bates. And, they use a blocking Y a ton in this offense. I think Logan Thomas is going to be your Travis Kelce light, at least as of right now. And obviously that can change, but I think Logan's looked good. He's moving well. I think he's still kind of figuring the offense out. And I think EB's kind of figuring out how to best to utilize him. Because, to me, Logan is a tremendous athlete, but he excels in kind of that basketball player role, like attacking the seam, the deep cross, short area quickness stuff, he's fine at it, but I wouldn't say that's like his superpower necessarily. So I think that they'll figure that out a little bit and kind of get him in some more roles where he can, run a slant or, do something and see how it looks. But I think that's your group, and I think you feel pretty good about it, quite honestly. And I'm super bummed for Armani. I'm super bummed for him because that injury is terrible. And, it's just a long rehab. And for a guy like him, he was going to be that guy. Like, he has those receiver traits. They were going to use him. He played really well last year in his minutes. So super bummed for him. Wish him a speedy recovery. And but I do think the 4 guys remaining are pretty good football players, and they give you good opportunity. And I said this last year, and this was with Armani in the mix. But I do think like these 4 guys, like when you see them on the field, they look like a bunch of freaks. They're all 6'6" plus. They all run pretty good. Like even Bates. Like Bates has been lined up wide a couple times, running like digs and stuff. And like because of his big body, he can catch a ball in a corner. So they're going to find ways to maximize these guys and put them in a good position to be successful. So while it's a bummer, Armani got hurt. I think they've got a lot of potential here at the position.
Yeah, Eli Wolf was with them in camp last year. He's available, but
he was in the XFL too.
Yeah, on the top of the available list, you do have a couple of vets that have done some things in this league. Cameron Brate is available. Jeff Swaim is available. Mercedes Lewis, who's 39 years old. Lewis is crazy. Is he your class, older than you? He's older.
He's older than me. I was a freshman when he was a senior at UCLA.
Damn.
So he's 4 years older than me.
Technically, he's still available and out there. Ryan Griffin has had a couple of good years in the league. Kyle Rudolph is available. So there are some veterans out there. Jesse James. So I'm curious if they bring someone in, but I tend to think that you're right, that they're just going to roll with these young guys in Logan, and anybody that was pushing for Logan Thomas to get released weeks ago. It's like, this is why you don't.
Right.
You just, if you needed the space to sign someone, fine, but you didn't necessarily need it. And so you hang on to your guys because guys get hurt, and them's the breaks.
And to defend Logan a little bit, like, he had some opportunities last year where, like, the quarterback didn't see him, or
Sure.
the ball's overthrown, or he's not getting schemed up to get touches. And I know that was a big point of frustration with him in that offense, was that the tight end wasn't really a feature. And
yeah, he certainly made that known by the end of last year.
This is going to be a very different experience for him in that whole group. So, and it'll be interesting to see how Bates kind of adjusts to the new group, because they're doing a lot of route running, and that's not really his forte. But, like, what are these roles going to be? And like I said, I think they've got some good athletes there, guys who catch the ball well, and guys that, because of their size, can be pretty big mismatches. So,
how many people asked you if you were ready to come out of retirement?
EB jokingly asked me for rookie minicamp if I could come out for a couple days. I said I could probably do 15 reps. Is what I said.
I feel like that would have been fun.
That would have been fun. That would have been great. Great little content there for us.
I was gonna say, like, as a content piece, like, come on, Julie, what are you doing over there? Running your department. Get Logan mic'd up. Get him in some pads. Figure out the liability.
Yes.
And then have the NFLPA shoot it down and say that's not allowed. Last thing I want to ask you about is the O-line. I saw Nikki Javala tweeting out that Nick Gates is already like an OTA MVP. He's just yelling at people. But overall, and again, not a lot of team reps, not a lot of line work. But what did you see from them in the limited reps that are available?
Yeah, so I do think that, in the limited team reps, I think, Cornelius Lucas is playing left tackle right now, and he does a great job. I think, again, the system really helps them. It helps them.
Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so what I'll say is, like, so for example, I coach a couple pass rushers, right? And one of the things about rushers is helping them identify when is an obvious pass rushing situation, right? And so there are certain formational tells, certain things you can do that kind of line that up and say, oh, this is when we got to pin our ears back and go. So he's pretty good. EB's good, just from like a 1,000-foot view, of not giving you straight tells, and then making sure that he's kind of moving the launch point of the quarterback. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but like keepers, half rolls, boots, play action pass. And it's not like Kyle Shanahan, like ball out, backs running downhill, like this really definitive visual that sucks the linebackers up. It's really just a thing that kind of gives the edge rusher a moment of like, what is this? And then the tackle can jump set the end. And I think he also does a good job of using formation. So keeping guys in tight splits. So the rusher's kind of like, am I going to get chipped? Do I need to get wider? And so you get kind of these bad rush looks. And then also using quick game. So, rushers, you typically get a sack off of a 7-step drop or a 5-step drop, which you wouldn't use unless it's like a longer down in distance. So quick game, like that guy gets off the ball as hard as he can, and the ball's already out of his hand before he even touches the tackle. And that using screens is another way, right? Not letting them kind of find their rhythm as a rusher is a huge feature of this offense. Like when you watch the Philadelphia game last year versus Kansas City in the Super Bowl, like I remember I watched the first 10 or 8 dropbacks, or passing plays, there's one true dropback. So basically, I think EB understands that the hardest thing to do in professional football outside of playing quarterback is pass protect. So I want to limit the true number of straight drop back pass attempts to a very small number. And if we are going to do that, I'm going to make sure you got chip help. I'm going to make sure you get alignment help, just so you can kind of work and modify your set to disrupt the pass rusher. So that's what I'm talking about. And I think that this system, like, I think Wiley's a good example. Like, he's nobody's like measurable All-American right tackle. Like, he never would fall in that category. He came in the league as a guard. But in this system, because of the movement that is required in the run game, in the screen game, the athleticism that's required to jump set, like, he's a very serviceable starter. He's going to be a plus starter for this team, right? So I think I look at that and I say, that's kind of what I'm talking about with that. So, like, in terms of straight rushes, right? Straight rushes for the 40 team periods they've had, I think there's 2 that I've counted, right? So that is a big priority for them. And so that doesn't mean they're not doing drop back passes. That means that We've got tight ends lined up tight. So we give them chip looks. We're doing a play pass. We're doing screens. We're doing quick game. We're doing keepers, like all that stuff. And it just disrupts the rusher enough where the tackle has to be on their game, but I don't have to be dialed to 11 the way I was in the offense last year, where it's like we're doing 7-step drops all the time, and we're really exposing these guys, and that's when you really need those elite pass protectors, right? Like I talked to Morgan, I talked to Trent, and one of the things they always say is like, I'm looking for tackle-friendly offenses, and Kyle's got a tackle-friendly offense. This offense appears to be very tackle-friendly. The offense up in New York's very tackle-friendly with the Jets, because it's that same West Coast variation.
Mm-hmm.
And there are systems that stress the hell out of tackles. And I think this is going to be good for everybody across the offensive line in terms of making them be much more productive this year.
Yeah. In terms of the depth chart right now, according to Ron Rivera and according to everything that we've seen, Leno will be your starting left tackle. Sadiq Charles is going to get the first shot at left guard. Looks like Gates is going to get the first shot at center. And then Cosme and Wiley on the right side. So obviously that is very subject to change depending on how the rest of the spring and ultimately the summer and fall go as training camp gets underway and practice and everything leading into week 1. But that's how we start. And that's all I got for the podcast, Logan. Anything else to tack on here at the end?
Yeah, I was going to say of that group, I think the biggest question mark based on film from last year and based on the first couple of days has been Sadiq. I think athletically he looks the part, but I think that's when I would kind of circle and be like, how does this one shake out? Because I think Cosme's looked pretty good. I think Wiley's looked pretty good. Gates, I think, has looked, like Nikki was saying, looked very good. But, there's obviously inconsistencies, but, on the whole, looks like they're getting what's going on. Sadiq's had a couple mental mistakes, a couple misses, and he's going against John Allen, so keep that with, whatever context you need. But I would keep an eye on that one. So.
Yeah, and we'll see how Chris Paul does. Obviously, ton of potential there, and he's the guy that's battling for that spot. Norwell, by the way, also not at camp. That's kind of expected, as they're expected to release him, but hasn't happened yet. He's also rehabbing an injury, so there's your full. Couldn't leave the pod. Couldn't leave the pod without the Andrew Norwell update, Logan.
I mean, people have been texting me about it, like, oh, what's going on with him? I don't know. Now you know.
Yeah, now you can text him back a link to this podcast and be like, listen to the whole thing. It's right there for you. Just keep on listening. Ta-da! All right, we'll be back next week. Obviously, get ready for week 2 of OTAs and anything else that happens between now and then. For Logan, I am Craig, and we'll see you next week on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.